My name is Madeline Harper Maddie to everyone who matters, and I've just turned 64. I like to think of myself as practical, steady, and calm. The sort of person who notices details most people overlook. But tonight, as I stood on the front porch of my modest Portland home, my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. The autumn wind carried a chill that slipped under the collar of my jacket, and the faint glow from the street lamp cast the bare branches into trembling shadows across the walkway. Lila, my granddaughter, bounded toward me from the car, her small figure huddled beneath a worn blue coat. She was 6, curious, bright-eyed, and usually fearless. But tonight, she clung to her stuffed rabbit as though it were her only anchor. Behind her, my daughter Harper lingered awkwardly near the car door, shifting her weight and glancing toward the street as if she expected someone or something to appear. "Thanks, Mom," Harper said, her voice clipped. "I have to work tonight. Just watch her. Make sure she's asleep by 8. I nodded and forced a smile, though something about the way she avoided my eyes made the warmth in my chest curdle. There was a hesitation in her step, a tension I hadn't noticed in the past. She lifted Lila into my arms, and the girl's tiny body pressed against mine, trembling slightly. "Are you okay, honey?" I whispered, brushing a stray curl from Lila's forehead. She nodded, but her eyes wide anxious. Darting told a different story. Harper gave me a fleeting glance and muttered, "Call me if anything happens. I'll be back in the morning." She climbed into her car and drove away, tail lights fading into the night. A cold silence stretched over the driveway, broken only by the faint hum of distant traffic and the soft sigh of the wind through the trees. I carried Lila inside, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me like a heavy cloak. Her coat was damp from the drizzle earlier, and I hung it carefully in the hall before leading her to the kitchen. The familiar smells of my home, warm bread, simmering broth, and the lingering scent of pine from the small centerpiece on the table should have been comforting. Instead, every shadow seemed longer, every creak in the floorboards louder. Lila sat at the kitchen table, hugging her rabbit tightly, and I poured her a cup of warm milk. She didn't reach for it. Her gaze remained fixed on the corner where the lamplight didn't quite reach, and a shiver ran down my spine. Something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would not pass quietly, that whatever Harper had left behind was more than just a child in need of bedtime. I guided her to the living room and let her curl up on the sofa with her rabbit. The television flickered silently, a colorful distraction she barely acknowledged. I sat beside her, half expecting her to speak, to tell me she was frightened, but she remained silent, eyes wide and restless. I wrapped my arms around her anyway, feeling the tension in her small body, and whispered promises I hoped I could keep. As the wind rattled the windows and the house settled into its nighttime rhythm, I realized the unease I felt wasn't just my imagination. Something had followed Harper's hurried exit, some hidden weight pressing against the quiet of our home. I tightened my hold on Lila and whispered once more, "I've got you, sweet girl. Nothing will happen while I'm here." And yet deep down I knew this night would not be ordinary. Morning light seeped through the blinds, painting the living room in soft stripes of gold and gray. I stirred, first careful not to wake Lila, but the faint sound of her small sighs pulled me from the fog of sleep. She lay curled on the sofa, still clutching her worn rabbit Milo, as if it were the only anchor in the room. The wind rattled the windows, carrying a chill that made the hair on my arms prickle. I knelt beside her, brushing the damp strands of hair from her forehead. "Good morning, sweet girl," I whispered. "Did you sleep at all?" She blinked slowly, eyes wide and tired, and shook her head. Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she might cry. I drew her into my arms. "It's okay. You're safe here with me," I said, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. Lila hesitated, then in the quietest voice I had ever heard her use, she leaned closer and whispered, "Grandma, Mommy said I can't tell you what I saw at her house." I froze the mug of coffee I'd set on the side table, suddenly forgotten. My heart thumped in my chest. "Sweetheart," I said, lowering my voice, "what did you see?" Her small hands gripped Milo tighter, and she swallowed hard. There's a girl in the basement," she whispered, her voice shaking. "She cries all the time. Her hands, they hurt. She says no one helps her." The room seemed to collapse into silence around us. I felt a cold surge through my veins, a mixture of fear and disbelief that made my hands shake. "Are you sure, honey?" I asked gently, though part of me already knew she wasn't imagining it. Her wide, fearful eyes bore into mine, imploring me to believe her. "Yes," Lila murmured, tears brimming in her eyes. I tried to see if Mommy would notice me, but she didn't want me to know. I held her tighter, my mind racing. Questions collided in my head. How could my daughter Harper allow this? Why would she hide such a thing from her own mother? The weight of the suspicion pressed on my chest, and I realized that this was no ordinary morning. No simple night left in my care. Something dark had followed us here, and it had a name. I led Lila to the kitchen and set her on the high chair, pouring her a cup of warm milk, which she barely touched. She kept her eyes fixed on a corner of the room, as though expecting to see shadows move. My voice shook slightly as I tried to coax her to speak more. "Sweetheart, tell me everything you remember, just the truth, okay?" She nodded, trembling. "I saw her behind a locked door, a little girl crying. She tried to hide her hands, but I saw the bruises. She said she couldn't move, and she kept asking for help." I felt a surge of protective fury rise in me. I gritted my teeth, swallowing back tears. I hugged Lila close, whispering reassurances I hardly felt, because every word carried the weight of dread. I needed to understand exactly what she had witnessed, and I needed proof. But for now, the only reality I could grasp was the fear in her small body, pressed against mine, and the knowledge that we were entangled in something far more serious than I had imagined. The morning stretched quietly, but the unease remained. Every creak of the floorboards, every whistle of wind through the eaves made me tense. I kept my hands on Lila, feeling her heartbeat, memorizing the rhythm as though it were a lifeline. Her trust in me was absolute, and I would not betray it. I knew I had to act. I had to find out the truth. And though the morning seemed calm, I felt it in my bones. This was only the beginning. I sat beside Lila on the sofa long after she had finally sipped her milk, the warmth of the morning sun filtering through the blinds. Her small head rested against my shoulder, and for a fleeting moment, everything felt almost normal. Almost. But my mind refused to rest. The whisper she had shared haunted me, a shadow over every memory, every corner of this quiet Portland home. I closed my eyes and let the memories come, as if they might offer guidance, a way to make sense of the fear pressing down on me. I remembered Alejandro, my late husband, tall and warm, always laughing in the kitchen as he helped me knead bread dough for the holidays. The smell of fresh baked bread, mixed with the pine-scented wreaths we'd hang on the door, filled our home with life and comfort. Those were days when Lila's laughter rang through the halls, bright and unrestrained, bouncing off the walls like sunlight. I remembered her tiny fingers grasping Alejandro's as he lifted her high into the air, making her squeal with delight. Milo, her stuffed rabbit, was always tucked under her arm, even then, a constant companion through scraped knees and bedtime fears. Those were moments of pure joy when the world outside our home could be cold and indifferent, but inside, we were safe. The contrast to this morning could not have been sharper. Now the house was quiet in a way that felt hollow. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I paced softly, imagining the shadowy corners where danger might be hidden. Lila's whispered confession was a knife twisting in my chest, but it was the memory of Alejandro's calm, protective presence that gave me a flicker of strength. If he were here, he would know exactly what to do, and somehow I had to find that courage in myself. I remembered the afternoons spent teaching Lila to ride her bike down the gentle slope in our backyard. Alejandro would run alongside, hands hovering just in case she wobbled, laughter mingling with the wind. That same wind now rattled the windows, carrying a chill that made me shiver. How could something so safe and ordinary become so uncertain overnight? I drew a deep breath and looked down at Lila, who stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. Her trust in me was complete, unspoken, yet absolute. I could not fail her. I whispered into her hair, "We'll be okay, sweet girl, I promise." My voice sounded steadier than I felt, but it was all I had for now. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the small living room, but it did little to chase away the darkness that had settled over my thoughts. The echoes of the past reminded me that safety was a fragile thing, but also that love could be a guide through fear. If I could remember how we had been happy, perhaps I could summon the courage to act, to confront whatever danger waited in the shadows. I held Lila close a little longer, letting the warmth of our shared memories settle between us, bracing myself for the work that lay ahead. The house was quiet, but the weight of responsibility pressed on me. I could feel it in every line of my body, in every beat of my heart, reminding me that what comes next will require all the courage I could muster. Night settled over Portland like a dark quilt, heavy and still. But inside the house, stillness was an illusion. Lila tossed and turned on the sofa, her small hands gripping Milo so tightly that the worn fabric stretched under her fingers. Every creak of the floorboards, every whistle of wind against the windows made her flinch. I sat beside her, my arm draped around her shoulders, and tried to offer comfort. "It's okay, sweet girl," I whispered. "I'm right here." Yet my own heart thumped in a way that betrayed the unease I was trying to hide. Even the soft glow from the lamp seemed to cast shadows too deep, too long, curling along the corners of the room, like tendrils of some hidden threat. Lila's wide eyes darted toward the kitchen where the refrigerator hummed steadily, a mundane sound that somehow made the shadows feel alive. "Grandma?" she murmured, voice trembling. "Did you hear that?" I strained to listen, my senses sharpening. A faint tapping echoed from somewhere in the house, irregular and soft, almost like someone walking lightly across the floor above us. My stomach clenched. "It's just the house settling," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Every instinct in me screamed that this was no ordinary noise. Lila burrowed closer, pressing Milo against her face. "I don't like it," she whispered, eyes wide and glistening. I hugged her tighter, feeling the tension in her small body, and whispered into her hair, "Nothing will hurt you, I promise." But even as I said it, I could feel the weight of doubt pressing down, a silent reminder that promises might not be enough. I guided her to her little bedroom, the walls painted a soft lavender, the furniture modest but familiar. I tucked her under the blankets, arranging Milo beside her so she could hold him. Her hands trembled as she clutched the stuffed rabbit, and I could hear her shallow, uneven breaths as she tried to settle. I pulled a chair close and watched her every flicker of shadow, every breath magnified by the tension in my chest. Outside, the wind rattled the old windows, and I imagined how easy it would be for fear to slip into a child's mind, how quickly the world could become a place of lurking shadows and unknown dangers. At one point, a soft thud came from the hallway, followed by a faint, scraping sound. Lila stirred, eyes wide, and I immediately rose, checking each corner with the flashlight on my phone. Nothing moved. No figure appeared, yet the sense of intrusion lingered. I returned to her side, pressing her small hands into mine, feeling her pulse fluttering against mine. "You're safe," I murmured, but my own voice trembled. Hours passed slowly. I stayed by her side holding Milo in place, whispering little reassurances, rubbing her back as she drifted in and out of sleep. Even as she finally seemed to rest, my mind could not. I replayed every creak, every shadow, every shiver. My body ached with vigilance, every sense alert, every nerve taut with the urgency to protect. By the time the clock on the wall ticked past midnight, I realized I hadn't left her side for more than a few minutes. My muscles burned, my eyes were heavy, but the weight of responsibility would not let me rest. Lila was small, fragile, and utterly unaware of the dangers she might be witnessing, and it fell to me to be both shield and guide. The night stretched endlessly, a canvas of quiet fear and rising tension, until the first faint light of dawn began to filter through the blinds. I leaned over and kissed Lila's hair, murmuring softly, "We made it through the night. Just a little longer, sweet girl." And yet deep down I knew that what we had survived was only the beginning. The morning light had barely begun to settle into the living room when Lila's small voice pierced the quiet. She clutched Milo tightly, her knuckles white against the fabric, and her wide eyes seemed to carry the weight of something far older than her 6 years. "Grandma," she whispered, trembling. I leaned closer, my heart thudding in my chest. "What is it, sweet girl?" Her lips quivered as she struggled to find the words. Finally, she spoke, in a voice so quiet, it barely carried over the hum of the refrigerator. "There's a girl in the basement. She cries all the time. Her hands, they hurt. She says nobody helps her." I froze. The spoon I had been holding for breakfast clattered onto the counter and my stomach lurched. The air seemed to thicken heavy with disbelief and rising panic. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "A girl in the basement?" I asked slowly, my voice low and measured. Lila nodded, her tiny shoulders shaking as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Yes, Mommy said I can't tell you, but I saw her. She's scared. She keeps asking for help, but Mommy doesn't listen." My pulse spiked, and every instinct in me screamed that this was no ordinary story. I felt the room tilt, a sudden vertigo of fear and disbelief. The notion that my daughter Harper could allow harm to come to another child right under her roof made my hands tremble and my chest tighten. I knelt beside Lila, holding her small hands in mine. "Honey, you're safe here. I promise," I whispered, though the words felt hollow compared to the horror of her revelation. I could feel the tiny, frantic beats of her heart against my palm, a fragile rhythm, demanding protection. She shivered, burying her face into Milo. "She's so scared, and she cries all night," Lila murmured, barely audible. "Her hands, they're red and hurt. I tried to see if Mommy would notice, but she didn't. She wouldn't even look." The room was silent, except for her trembling breaths. My mind raced through every corner of Harper's house, every creak of floorboards, every closed door. My stomach knotted with a sickening mix of disbelief and rage. How could a child be trapped like that? How could Harper not intervene? The thought made my hands clench into fists and my teeth grind. I drew Lila close and whispered assurances I barely felt. "We're going to make sure she's safe, sweet girl. Nothing will happen while I'm here. You and Milo will protect you both." I could feel her trembling subside slightly, though only a fraction, and the sense of urgency in my chest intensified. Her tear-filled eyes met mine, searching for trust, for guidance, for someone who could act. And I knew deep down with a certainty that left no room for doubt that I had to do something. Waiting, hoping, or imagining this would resolve itself was no longer an option. I breathed in slowly, trying to center myself. I had always been the steady hand in Lila's life, the anchor when storms of confusion and fear passed over her. This was another storm, but larger, more frightening, with consequences far beyond bedtime tears or scraped knees. I adjusted her small hands around Milo, pressing the stuffed rabbit against her chest. "We'll figure this out," I said firmly. "No one will hurt her again, not on my watch." And as the sun climbed higher, casting pale morning light across the room, I realized that the day had already changed. Lila had given me a responsibility I could not ignore. The secret she carried was real. The danger was real. And I would do whatever it took to protect not only my granddaughter, but the child who had no one else to defend her. The day passed slowly, each minute stretching like taffy, as I tried to keep Lila occupied while my mind raced through the terrible secret she had revealed. I brewed coffee for myself and poured her a small cup of cocoa, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But my eyes kept darting toward the door, imagining what might lie behind the walls of Harper's house. As I sipped my coffee, I started replaying the details of Lila's whispers in my head. Something about them didn't sit right, not the words themselves, but the way Harper had delivered them when dropping Lila off. Her hurried glance over her shoulder, the tight grip on the car door, the unnatural pause before she left, they all suggested unease or perhaps an effort to conceal something. After lunch, I went into Lila's backpack to tidy it, and that's when I noticed the first real inconsistency. A folded note fell from the bottom of the bag, one that Lila hadn't shown me. It was scribbled in Harper's handwriting, "Remember, don't tell Grandma. It's for her own good." My stomach clenched. Words intended to silence a child to protect a secret that shouldn't exist. I felt a wave of disbelief mixed with rage. I tried to push down the panic, telling myself I needed concrete signs before I could confront anything. I glanced at Lila, who was quietly drawing at the kitchen table, Milo clutched to her chest. Her drawings were innocent at first. Flowers, stick figures, a sun in the corner. But then I noticed the corners of the page marked with heavy black lines, enclosing a small figure beneath what appeared to be a door. My throat tightened as I realized that she might be drawing the same basement she had described in whispers. I went to Harper's house, using the excuse of dropping off something she'd forgotten. The door opened under my knock, and the house smelled faintly of bleach and cinnamon, an odd combination that made my stomach turn. I noticed small things immediately. The basement door was locked with a padlock that wasn't there. The last time I visited the floorboards above seemed to creak in ways they hadn't before, and a faint odor, metallic and sharp, hung in the air. I walked slowly, letting my eyes sweep the rooms. A faint toy lay abandoned in the hallway, one I didn't recognize from Lila's usual things. The window blinds were drawn tighter than normal, even in the middle of the day, casting long, unnatural shadows. I felt my pulse quicken, the sense of urgency growing with every step. Harper appeared in the kitchen, her expression calm, but her hands fidgeted with the edge of a dish towel. "Oh, Mom," she said, forcing a smile. "Just dropping by." I nodded, my voice steady, despite the storm of suspicion inside me. She didn't ask any questions about Lila, and that silence, that refusal to even glance at her daughter, confirmed my dread. Something was terribly wrong. I left the house with my mind spinning, noticing every little detail I had once overlooked: the slight scuff on the basement door, the unusual arrangement of furniture, the air that seemed heavier somehow, as if holding secrets. By the time I returned home, I had a list of doubts, a growing sense of urgency, and the firm conviction that I could not ignore what Lila had told me. Sitting back at the kitchen table, I held her small hands again, feeling the warmth of her pulse beneath my fingers. Each clue I had gathered added weight to the secret she carried. I knew now that this was no imagination, no childish fear. The basement, the girl, the locked door, they were real. And it was up to me to find the truth before anyone else could be hurt. The next morning, I found myself walking toward Lila's elementary school, a sense of urgency pressing on me like a physical weight. I had called ahead to speak with her teacher, Mrs. Yolanda Diaz, a kind woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. I had met her at school events before, but now as I approached the office, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Mrs. Diaz, I began softly, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm Madeline Harper, Lila's grandmother. I need to talk to you about something important. Her gaze softened, and she gestured for me to sit. Of course, Ms. Harper. Is everything all right with Lila? I swallowed hard. I think she's seen something troubling at home. I need to understand if she's been acting differently at school. Mrs. Diaz nodded slowly. I've noticed changes in her lately. She's withdrawn quiet, almost fearful. Usually she's lively, asking questions, talking about her day, but now she's distant. She paused as if choosing her words carefully. And there have been some drawings that concern me. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder of Lila's recent artwork. I flipped through the pages slowly. At first glance, they seemed typical for a 6-year-old Bright Sun's stick figures flowers. But as I studied further, my chest tightened. Several drawings showed small figures trapped behind heavy black lines, rooms that resembled basements, doors with locks and scribbled shapes that looked like hands reaching out. She draws this repeatedly, Mrs. Diaz explained. It's not imaginative play. There's fear in these drawings, anxiety. Sometimes she talks about being afraid of certain rooms at home or says things like, no one listens to her. I've tried to ask more, but she clams up. I pressed my lips together, nodding. Every detail, she confirmed the withdrawal. The anxious tone, the recurring dark images, matched Lila's whispers from the night before. My hands shook slightly as I held the drawings, feeling the gravity of what they suggested. I understand, Ms. Harper, Mrs. Diaz continued, that as a grandmother, you want to protect her. I don't know what exactly is happening, but I can tell you she's been affected. Something is scaring her, and it's consistent enough that I think your concerns are valid. A wave of relief mixed with terror washed over me. Relief that I was not imagining things, that Lila had not conjured this from thin air, and terror at the implications of the evidence. My mind raced, replaying every detail Lila had whispered, every locked door, every unusual shadow. I thanked Mrs. Diaz, gathering the folder carefully. Thank you for sharing this with me, I said, my voice tight. I need to make sure she's safe, and your observations will help me do that. As I stepped back into the crisp Portland air, the sun casting long autumn shadows across the playground, I felt a grim determination solidify inside me. The signs were here, undeniable and clear. Lila's fear was real, and it was corroborated. Every detail pointed to something darker lurking behind the walls of Harper's house. I clutched Milo in my mind as tightly as I would hold Lila, feeling the weight of responsibility settle firmly on my shoulders. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the urgency to act pressed on me with every step I took back toward home. By mid-afternoon, the unease pressing on me had become unbearable. I couldn't ignore the pieces stacking up, the whispers from Lila, the dark drawings, and the teacher's confirmation. I needed outside confirmation, something tangible, and I remembered my next-door neighbor, Mr. Javier Morales. A widower in his 70s, he had lived on this block for decades, a quiet man with sharp eyes and a meticulous nature. If anyone had noticed unusual activity at Harper's house, it would be him. I walked briskly across the damp sidewalk, the autumn leaves rustling underfoot. Javier was tending to his small vegetable garden when I arrived, pulling weeds with careful, deliberate movements. He looked up and gave me a faint, wary smile. "Maddie," he said. "Everything all right? You look troubled." I took a deep breath. "Javier, I need your help. It's about Harper's house, about Lila." My voice faltered. I hesitated before speaking, wary of sounding paranoid. "Have you ever seen anything strange there at night?" He straightened, and the faint lines on his forehead deepened. Now that you mention it, last week, late one night, I thought I saw someone, or rather something, move behind Harper's basement window. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It was a small child, I think. She didn't look like Lila. My stomach sank. What did you do? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't interfere. It was late, and I didn't want to assume anything. But I kept an eye on it. The next night, I checked my security camera. Nothing clear, blurry footage, but enough to see a small figure entering the basement area in a hurry. I recorded it, saved it. I didn't know what else to do. Javier led me to his modest living room, where a small monitor displayed the grainy black and white footage. My heart thudded as I watched. The image flickered grainy and distorted, but I could make out a figure, tiny, hunched, moving quickly across the porch, hands clutching something, and then disappearing through a side door. The figure's size and posture matched none of the residents I knew. I felt my pulse accelerate, a rush of both horror and determination. This was evidence crude and imperfect, but enough to confirm my worst fears. Lila had been telling the truth. The little girl she described was real, and she was being held somewhere within Harper's house. Javier, thank you, I said, voice trembling. You've given me the proof I needed to act. I can't let this go any longer, he nodded solemnly. I've lived here a long time, Maddie. You've always been careful, observant. I trust you'll do what's right. I left Javier's house, clutching the USB drive he had handed me containing the security footage. Each step back to my own home felt heavy with urgency. I replayed Lila's whispers in my mind, her trembling voice describing the girl's bruised hands, the endless cries, the fear that no one would help. By the time I reached my front door, I had made a decision. I could no longer wait, no longer hope this would resolve itself. The evidence was in my hands, corroborated by both a reliable adult witness and my granddaughter's observations. I stepped inside and called Lila to my side, holding her small hands and feeling the rapid pulse beneath them. Sweet girl, I whispered. We're going to make sure everything's all right. I promise you. No one is going to be hurt while we're here. Her eyes wide and trusting, searched mine for reassurance. I pressed my forehead gently against hers, letting the weight of my resolve sink in. I could feel the fear pressing down like a physical weight, but alongside it a growing determination that I would not fail her or the other child. I placed the USB drive on the kitchen counter, knowing that the next step would require authority, evidence, and courage in equal measure. Every detail, every blurry shadow, every whisper had brought us here. The stakes were higher now, and there was no turning back. By mid-morning, the weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me like a physical force. I moved through my quiet Portland neighborhood, the crisp autumn air doing little to soothe the tension coiling in my chest. Neighbors waved politely as I passed, but their eyes lingered a moment too long, flicking with curiosity, suspicion, or perhaps pity. As I returned from the market, I overheard whispers spilling from a cluster of women near the corner cafe. She's been acting strangely, one murmured. Always watching that girl? Maybe she's imagining things. Another chimed in, voice soft but cutting. Poor thing. Too old to be so worked up over a child. Surely she's exaggerating. I slowed, gripping my shopping bags tightly, forcing a calm I did not feel. Each word felt like a needle pressing into my resolve. I wanted to call out to defend the truth that had been whispered into my ears by a 6-year-old, confirmed by a teacher and captured on blurry security footage, but the weight of polite appearances restrained me. Inside my home, the isolation deepened. Even friends I trusted hesitated, offering sympathetic smiles without acknowledging the evidence. You might be overthinking it, Maddie, one said gently during a brief phone call. Children have wild imaginations, and shadows can seem frightening at night. Maybe it's nothing. I clenched the phone and exhaled slowly. The words stung not for their content, but for the disbelief they carried. Even with tangible proof in my hands, even with Lila's frightened whispers echoing in my mind, the world around me questioned my judgment. I felt the familiar tightness of doubt creeping in, gnawing at the edges of my confidence. Lila sat on the couch, Milo clutched tightly, looking up at me with those big, trusting eyes. I forced a smile for her, a shield against the storm outside. She didn't understand the whispers, the sideways glances, the quiet murmurs that followed me wherever I went. All she knew was that her grandmother was supposed to keep her safe, and that I could not fail her. As the afternoon shadows stretched across the living room floor, I tried to focus on what mattered: Lila, the little girl in the basement, and the responsibility that rested squarely on my shoulders. The social pressure, the murmured doubts, and the sideways glances of neighbors threatened to erode my resolve. But each time I pushed the fear back. I reviewed the security footage again, watching the tiny figure hurry past Harper's porch, invisible to anyone who might have walked by. My hands shook, but my mind sharpened. Every whisper, every drawing, every confirmation from Mrs. Diaz reinforced the truth I could no longer ignore. Even if the world doubted me, even if whispers of delusional and overprotective followed me through the streets, I could not waver. Lila's faith in me, the evidence in my hands, and the urgency of the child's fear were stronger than any gossip or skepticism. I straightened my spine and made a silent promise: no matter what anyone else said, I would protect her. The voices of doubt might surround me, but inside, I felt the resolve harden a quiet fire that would carry me forward, past the isolation, past the whispered disbelief, and into the actions that had to be taken. Chapter 10: Taking Action. By mid-morning, the quiet tension in my home had grown unbearable. Lila sat on the sofa with Milo pressed tightly to her chest, absorbed in coloring, but the shadow of fear that lingered around her small figure made it impossible to ignore. I had reached the point where hesitation was no longer an option. The evidence, though imperfect, was undeniable. Lila's whispers, the drawings, the security footage from Mr. Morales. Someone needed to act, and it had to be me. I gathered everything I could find that might help: the USB drive with the grainy video, Lila's drawings, notes from Mrs. Diaz, and even the little folded paper that Harper had left in Lila's backpack. Each item carried weight, a tangible representation of the secret my granddaughter had been forced to keep. I stacked them carefully in a folder, my hands trembling slightly as I imagined what the authorities would think. The moral clarity I felt left no room for doubt. This was bigger than gossip, bigger than fear. A child was in danger. Another life might be at stake. I needed courage, the sort that rises from knowing the right thing is also the hardest thing. I packed the folder into my coat, checking Lila once more before leaving. "I'll be back soon, sweet girl," I whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Everything will be okay." The streets of Portland were damp from an early drizzle, the gray sky pressing down like a warning. I walked briskly toward the nearest police precinct, a modest building with faded brick, and a few cars parked outside. My stomach churned with nervous energy, but each step forward solidified the determination that had settled in my chest. At the front desk, a young officer glanced up as I entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, tone polite but casual. "I need to speak with someone in charge." "It's urgent," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the surge of fear rising inside me. "There's a child in danger, and I have evidence that needs to be reviewed immediately." He hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead. Lieutenant Morales is in his office. I'll let him know you're here." I waited, pacing lightly, my mind running through the details I had to convey. Every second felt amplified, each heartbeat a reminder of what was at stake. When Morales finally appeared, a tall man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a weary expression, I felt a flicker of hope. "Ms. Harper," he said, offering a hand that I shook firmly. "You said it's urgent." Yes, I said, pulling out the folder and USB drive. My granddaughter witnessed something terrible. A child is being held in a basement, and there's evidence to support it. Drawings, security footage, testimony from her teacher, and observations from a neighbor. I can't explain everything in detail, but it's enough to act before anyone else is hurt. Morales took the folder, scanning the documents, and glancing at the video on my phone. His expression remained controlled, but I could see the lines of concern deepen around his eyes. "This is serious," he said quietly. "We'll review everything immediately, but I need you to stay available for questions." I nodded, the knot in my chest easing slightly, though I knew the real test was still ahead. The first step had been taken, and the momentum was building. I had summoned the courage to bring the evidence to those with authority, to take responsibility when hesitation might have been easier. Stepping back into the drizzle, I breathed deeply, letting the cold air fill my lungs. Lila's safety, the child's safety, depended on the next moves. I clutched the folder to my chest, feeling the weight of moral responsibility alongside the determination that had carried me this far. I returned home heart heavy, but resolute, ready to face whatever came next. The first steps had been taken, and now there was no turning back. The precinct smelled of stale coffee and paperwork, a faint metallic tang lingering in the air. Lieutenant Morales motioned for me to sit in a small office, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the walls. My hands clutched the folder containing Lila's drawings, the USB drive, and all the notes I had painstakingly gathered. Every detail mattered, and I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down with each passing second. Morales leaned back in his chair, expression calm but guarded. "Ms. Harper," he began, "we take allegations like this seriously, but you understand that we need evidence verification and a clear legal path before taking any action. You've given us some information, but it's not enough to justify an immediate search or intervention." I felt a tight knot form in my chest. I had expected hesitancy, but the casual dismissal ignited a spark of frustration. "Lieutenant," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the surge of emotion, "this isn't hypothetical. My granddaughter witnessed a child being locked in a basement. I have her drawings, security footage, testimony from her teacher, and a neighbor's observations. This is concrete. If you wait, that child could be in danger right now." Morales tapped a pen against his desk, considering me. "I understand your concern truly, but protocols exist for a reason. We can't act solely on second-hand reports and grainy video." I took a deep breath, pressing the folder closer. "This is my granddaughter we're talking about. She's terrified, she's truthful, and every piece of evidence corroborates her story. You have to see the urgency. Waiting isn't an option. I can't stand by and let anyone get hurt while bureaucracy debates whether my granddaughter is credible." Morales' eyes narrowed slightly, the skepticism giving way to something softer concern. "I can't promise immediate action without proper evaluation, Ms. Harper, but we can start by reviewing everything thoroughly. We'll interview the witnesses, verify the footage, and check any related reports. If it all aligns—" I felt my jaw tighten. "Lieutenant, with respect, there is no time to align slowly. Every minute that child is in that house could be a minute too long. I've done everything I can to gather proof. I'm not asking for blind action, I'm asking for responsiveness, for urgency. Can you do that?" He leaned forward, hands resting on the edge of the desk. There was a pause, a silence thick with tension as he weighed my words. "You're serious," he said finally, voice low. "You're not exaggerating." "I am as serious as the danger that child faces right now," I replied firmly. "You have the materials. You have the testimony. I will answer every question, every detail, but you must act before it's too late." Morales exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right. We'll mobilize a team to review the evidence immediately and conduct interviews. I can't guarantee the timing of a raid, but we'll escalate this as quickly as procedure allows. I'll personally oversee it. Relief surged through me, mingled with lingering fear. Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate it more than I can say, I murmured, clutching the folder tightly. As I left the office, the fluorescent lights fading behind me, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The system had been hesitant, cautious, slow, but I had forced their attention. I had spoken with clarity, with evidence, with urgency, and now with authority, finally acknowledging the danger the next steps could begin. Outside, the gray sky over Portland pressed down, but my resolve burned brighter. Lila's small face, wide-eyed and trusting, was etched in my mind. The responsibility rested squarely on my shoulders, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt that action was possible. I would not let bureaucracy or doubt delay justice. The precinct smelled of stale coffee and paperwork, a faint metallic tang lingering in the air. Lieutenant Morales motioned for me to sit in a small office, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the walls. My hands clutched the folder containing Lila's drawings, the USB drive, and all the notes I had painstakingly gathered. Every detail mattered, and I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down with each passing second. Morales leaned back in his chair, expression calm, but guarded. "Ms. Harper," he began, "we take allegations like this seriously, but you understand that we need evidence verification and a clear legal path before taking any action. You've given us some information, but it's not enough to justify an immediate search or intervention." I felt a tight knot form in my chest. I had expected hesitancy, but the casual dismissal ignited a spark of frustration. "Lieutenant," I said, keeping my voice steady, "despite the surge of emotion, this isn't hypothetical. My granddaughter witnessed a child being locked in a basement. I have her drawings, security footage testimony from her teacher, and a neighbor's observations. This is concrete. If you wait, that child could be in danger right now." Morales tapped a pen against his desk, considering me. "I understand your concern, truly. But protocols exist for a reason. We can't act solely on secondhand reports and grainy video." I took a deep breath, pressing the folder closer. This is my granddaughter we're talking about. She's terrified, she's truthful, and every piece of evidence corroborates her story. You have to see the urgency. Waiting isn't an option. I can't stand by and let anyone get hurt while bureaucracy debates whether my granddaughter is credible. Morales's eyes narrowed slightly, the skepticism giving way to something softer concern. "I can't promise immediate action without proper evaluation, Ms. Harper. But we can start by reviewing everything thoroughly. We'll interview the witnesses, verify the footage, and check any related reports. If it all aligns..." I felt my jaw tighten. "Lieutenant, with respect, there is no time to align slowly. Every minute that child is in that house could be a minute too long. I've done everything I can to gather proof. I'm not asking for blind action. I'm asking for responsiveness, for urgency. Can you do that?" He leaned forward, hands resting on the edge of the desk. There was a pause, a silence thick with tension as he weighed my words. "You're serious," he said finally, voice low. "You're not exaggerating." "I am as serious as the danger that child faces right now," I replied firmly. "You have the materials. You have the testimony. I will answer every question, every detail, but you must act before it's too late." Morales exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right. We'll mobilize a team to review the evidence immediately and conduct interviews. I can't guarantee the timing of a raid, but we'll escalate this as quickly as procedure allows. I'll personally oversee it." Relief surged through me, mingled with lingering fear. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate it more than I can say," I murmured, clutching the folder tightly. As I left the office, the fluorescent lights fading behind me, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The system had been hesitant, cautious, slow, but I had forced their attention. I had spoken with clarity, with evidence, with urgency, And now, with authority finally acknowledging the danger, the next steps could begin. Outside, the gray sky over Portland pressed down, but my resolve burned brighter. Lila's small face, wide-eyed and trusting, was etched in my mind. The responsibility rested squarely on my shoulders, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt that action was possible. I would not let bureaucracy or doubt delay justice. Back in my living room, the folder of evidence sat heavily on the kitchen table, a tangible weight that felt like both a burden and a lifeline. I spread Lila's drawings across the surface, each page a window into her frightened mind, black lines forming small rooms, doors locked tight, tiny figures with pained expressions. The innocence of the crayons contrasted sharply with the darkness of the scenes they depicted. But there was no mistaking the fear they conveyed. I replayed the security footage on the laptop, the grainy image flickering with static, yet unmistakably showing a small figure darting across Harper's porch late at night. The posture, the hesitancy, the way the child's hands clutched something tightly, it was consistent with Lila's whispered account. My pulse quickened with a mix of horror and urgency. I reached for the handwritten notes from Mrs. Diaz, detailing Lila's unusual behavior and the patterns of anxiety she had observed over the past week. The teacher's words reinforced what I already feared. This was not imagination, not childish exaggeration. Lila had seen something, and it was real. Then I added the testimony from Mr. Morales, my neighbor. His description of a child at Harper's house, corroborated by the blurry but damning footage from his security camera, tied the puzzle together. Each piece independently might have seemed circumstantial, but together they formed a clear, alarming pattern. My hands shook as I organized the materials into a single stack ready to present to Lieutenant Morales. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Relief mixed uneasily with tension. Relief that the evidence finally aligned with Lila's account, giving the authorities a concrete reason to act. Tension because the child's life depended on the speed and seriousness of the response. Every second that passed, I imagined the girl behind that basement door, frightened and alone, waiting for someone to intervene. I looked at Lila, who was perched on the sofa beside me, clutching Milo with wide, innocent eyes. "You were brave," I whispered, tracing her small hand with my finger. "You told me the truth even though it scared you. That's why we can help her." Her eyes shimmered with a mixture of pride and lingering fear, and I felt a pang of both heartbreak and determination. Gathering the folder, I double-checked every element: the drawings, the video, the teacher's notes, the neighbor's report, and Lila's own statement, written carefully in her small handwriting. It was a fragile but complete record, a mosaic of truth that no one could dismiss outright. I felt the enormity of what lay ahead, pressing down on me: the confrontation, the potential danger, the steps we had to take to save the child. Yet, for the first time since Lila had whispered her secret, I also felt a glimmer of hope. The proof was undeniable. It was real, it was tangible, and it was compelling enough to demand action. I set the folder down and rested my forehead against my hands. My breath came in shallow, tense bursts, but beneath it all, a quiet fire had ignited. This was our chance, the child's chance. With the authorities finally equipped to act, I could hope that the nightmare might end before anyone else was hurt. I straightened, taking one last glance at Lila and Milo, and whispered to myself, "We can do this. We have the proof. We will save her." The folder sat between us like a shield, a symbol of both responsibility and possibility. The next steps would be critical, and now, at last, we had a chance to make them count. The night was unusually still, the Portland streets slick from a light drizzle that reflected the pale glow of streetlights. I sat in my car a few blocks away from Harper's house, the folder of evidence on the passenger seat beside me. The police cruisers arrived first, engines muted, but lights flashing faintly in the darkness, signaling the approach of authority, and the weight of what was about to unfold. My hands trembled as I clutched the steering wheel, anticipation and fear coiling tight in my chest. Lieutenant Morales emerged from the lead vehicle, motioning for me to join him. His presence was calm, deliberate, a steady anchor in the storm of adrenaline coursing through me. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "As ready as I'll ever be." The team moved quickly, the sound of boots on wet pavement echoing ominously. I followed Morales to the front door, every step feeling like a heartbeat in a symphony of tension. The house loomed before us, dark, except for the dim porch light, ordinary to any passerby, but now the setting of a potential nightmare. Morales tapped on the door with authority, and a moment later, Harper appeared. Her face was pale, eyes wide with shock, then narrowing into anger as she registered the police presence. "What is this?" she demanded, voice sharp, trembling with fury. "How dare you? This is my home." Harper Morales said firmly, holding up the legal paperwork for a search warrant, "We have reason to believe a child is in danger inside this residence. You are required to comply." Her reaction was immediate and violent. She tried to shove past the officers' shouting accusations, claiming I was lying, that this was a fabrication meant to hurt her. Ricardo, her older brother, appeared behind her, his stance defensive, pointing fingers and yelling that the police had no right, that I was interfering. I stayed close, feeling the adrenaline spike, as officers calmly but firmly guided Harper aside and secured the entry. "Stay calm," Morales said to me, his voice low. "We're proceeding." Inside, the team moved with precision, checking each room systematically. The basement door, padlocked and ominous, drew their attention immediately. Morales approached, a set of keys in hand, and I could feel the tension coiling in the air like a physical entity. Harper's protests grew more desperate, her voice shrill and panicked, but the officers remained steady, assuring her that this was for the safety of all involved. With a click, the lock gave way, the heavy door swinging open to reveal a dim, cold basement. The officers' flashlights cut through the shadows, and my heart froze at the sight of a small, huddled figure in the corner. She clutched a worn, stuffed animal, hands bruised and arms trembling. The fear in her eyes mirrored Lila's description perfectly, a living confirmation of everything I had feared. One officer stepped forward carefully, lifting the child into his arms and murmuring reassurances. Relief surged through me, but it was laced with lingering terror, what other horrors might have been hidden in the shadows. The team quickly checked every corner, every door, confirming no additional children were present, the safety of the child their immediate priority. I knelt beside the rescued child, holding her hands and whispering that she was safe, that no one would hurt her again. Lila clutched my other hand, her tiny fingers entwined with mine, eyes wide with cautious hope. The emotional weight of the night pressed down on me, exhaustion mixing with an overwhelming sense of moral vindication. Harper's cries had become distant as the officers escorted her from the basement, placing her under temporary custody for questioning. Ricardo's furious protests faded into stunned silence as the reality of the evidence unfolded around him. My role as protector, the urgency of Lila's whispers, and the tangible proof I had collected had forced action despite skepticism and anger. Outside, the rain had lightened to a mist. I watched as Morales coordinated the team, ensuring the child's safety and documenting the scene. The tension remained, but relief settled in my chest, like a small, fragile ember. One life had been spared, and though the aftermath would bring questions, confrontations, and legal hurdles, the immediate danger had passed. The basement smelled damp and cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth and security that had been so absent from this child's life. Lucia, small and trembling, sat curled in a corner, her hands bruised and her eyes wide with fear. The moment the officer lifted her gently into his arms, I felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly knocked the breath from me. Lila clung to my side. Milo pressed against her chest, eyes shining with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Grandma!" "She's safe," she whispered, voice trembling. I nodded, squeezing Lila's hand tightly. "Yes, sweet girl, she's safe now." The officers worked quickly, checking the basement for any additional dangers, ensuring every corner was secure. Harper's protests had faded into stunned silence, her anger eclipsed by the undeniable truth. The tangible evidence, the security footage, the drawings, the teacher's notes had guided the authorities to this moment, where fear was replaced by safety. I knelt beside Lucia as she clung to a small, worn blanket, whispering softly that she would be okay. Her body trembled, but there was a spark of recognition, a glimmer of trust that had long been absent. Lila, her small hand still entwined with mine, looked on with wide eyes, witnessing justice unfold before her very eyes. The officers gently led Harper away, her voice quiet now, stripped of the rage that had fueled her attempts to obstruct the rescue. Ricardo lingered briefly at the door, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief, before finally stepping aside. The weight of truth pressed heavily on him, and for the first time he could no longer deny what had been hidden for so long. Outside, the air was damp but fresher somehow, the mist weaving between streetlights, as if cleansing the world of the horrors that had taken place indoors. I held both girls close, feeling the tremors of fear slowly give way to the beginnings of calm. Tears welled in my eyes, a mixture of relief and the profound emotional release that comes after a long night of worry and tension. Lila looked up at me, voice small but resolute. "Grandma, we helped her," she said. I nodded, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "Yes, sweet girl, you were brave. And because of your courage, we made sure she's safe." The reunion was quiet but powerful. Lucia, still shaken, nestled against my side, while Lila pressed close, sharing the moment of emotional triumph. I whispered to both, assuring them that the danger had passed, that they were no longer alone, and that they were loved beyond measure. I glanced at the officers who worked methodically to document the scene and ensure that both children would be placed in safe, supportive care. My heart swelled with gratitude for their diligence, but also with pride for the role we had all played. My granddaughter's courage, the evidence gathered, and the moral resolve that had guided me every step of the way. For the first time in days, a sense of peace settled over me. Fragile, but real. Tears streamed down my cheeks, blending relief with the quiet joy of witnessing justice done. The children were safe, the immediate danger had been removed, and a new chapter of recovery and hope could begin. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds as news crews began arriving at the Harper residence. By the time I reached the front porch, cameras were rolling, microphones poised, and neighbors had gathered, whispering in hushed tones that quickly turned to audible curiosity. The truth that had been hidden for so long was finally stepping into the light. I watched from a distance as Harper, still pale and rigid, was escorted into the police cruiser. Handcuffs glinted in the sunlight, a stark symbol of accountability. Ricardo stood beside her, jaw tight, eyes darting between the officers and the gathering crowd, powerless to alter what was unfolding. The spectacle was public, undeniable, and yet it carried a heavy weight of sorrow and disappointment. The media broadcasted the story quickly, highlighting the evidence, the rescue, and the brave actions of a grandmother who refused to be silenced. Lila stood beside me, clinging to Milo, eyes wide, as she realized that the whispers she had shared and the drawings she had created were not just taken seriously. They had changed everything. Officers guided Harper through the press, her protests drowned out by the mounting evidence and public attention. Every camera, every microphone recorded the undeniable truth: a child had been in danger, and justice had intervened. I felt a surge of vindication, a hard-earned closure, after nights of fear, doubt, and relentless vigilance. The community buzzed with reactions. Some neighbors whispered regret for doubting me. Others offered quiet apologies as they approached. The local news aired interviews with those involved, highlighting Lila's courage and my determination to act. I could feel the eyes of the town on us, a mix of awe, relief, and newfound respect. Despite the vindication, tension lingered. Questions remained about how Harper had fallen so far, what had driven her to conceal such darkness, and how Ricardo might be held accountable for his complicity. The legal proceedings were just beginning, and although one chapter had closed, another was set to unfold in courtrooms and hearts alike. I knelt beside Lila and the rescued child, now safe, and beginning to process the reality of what had happened. "You did the right thing," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's forehead. "Because you were brave, the truth came out, and someone who needed help is safe." Lila's small hand squeezed mine, a quiet acknowledgement that her voice had mattered, that her courage had changed everything. Though the danger had passed, the weight of the events lingered in our hearts. We had exposed the truth, confronted evil, and ensured the safety of two innocent children, but the emotional and social fallout would continue to ripple through our lives and the community. I felt a mix of relief, pride, and the sober understanding that vigilance and moral courage often come at a cost, even when justice prevails. Standing together on the porch, I looked at Lila and the rescued child, their eyes reflecting trust and hope. The air was crisp, the morning light bright, and for the first time in weeks, a sense of clarity and justice settled over us. The truth had been revealed, and though challenges remained, the path forward was now defined by honesty, courage, and protection of those who could not protect themselves. The days that followed were quiet, a gentle reprieve after the storm of fear, uncertainty, and confrontation. Lila and Lucia adjusted slowly to a life where safety was certain, where their voices could be heard without fear, and where the shadows of the past no longer loomed so heavily. I watched them play together in the backyard, their laughter a delicate healing melody that seemed almost impossible after everything that had happened. Lila held Milo tightly, occasionally glancing at Lucia, who was learning to trust the world again, her small hands brushing hesitantly across toys and familiar surfaces. I sat on the porch, a cup of tea warming my hands, and allowed myself to breathe deeply for the first time in weeks. Relief mingled with exhaustion, but also with a profound sense of accomplishment. Every decision, every moment of courage, had led to this safety, justice, and the fragile beginnings of recovery. Neighbors approached cautiously at first, offering quiet smiles, shared stories of concern, and small tokens of support. Slowly, the whispers of doubt faded, replaced by expressions of admiration and acknowledgement. The community had witnessed not just the exposure of truth, but the steadfast courage it took to protect the most vulnerable. Their support, though understated, carried a weight that buoyed my own spirit. I reflected on the journey, the fear, the evidence gathering, the tense confrontation with authority, and finally, the rescue. It had been harrowing, and yet through it all, hope had persisted. Lila's bravery, the clarity of evidence, and the moral conviction that guided my actions had combined to restore a sense of balance in a world that had briefly tilted toward darkness. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I watched the children's shadows stretch across the lawn. Their giggles and chatter filled the space, once heavy with dread, and I felt an unexpected catharsis. Courage had prevailed, love had guided us, and justice had been served. I took Lila's hand, and together we walked toward the house, Lucia following, her small fingers entwined with Milo's. The path ahead was still long, full of recovery and rebuilding, but for the first time, I felt a quiet confidence. The trauma would fade with care, patience, and the warmth of family and community. In that moment, I understood that hope, once restored, could endure. Courage, love, and justice had not only saved lives, they had begun to heal hearts. The future, though uncertain, felt possible again.